Hello. It's so great to be here. You've been hearing about some incredible technology. We just saw a glimpse of what the future looks like today. What I want to talk about is the mindset I think we need to have to fully take advantage of all of this exciting technology. And I'm going to mainly be showing this through cartoons. So I want to start with a bit of a caption contest. We sent that out today through the app, asking everybody in this room to come up with funny and creative captions to fit this situation. And I wanted to start by recognizing one caption that sort of solves this picture. I love doing this type of exercise because you have one image and a room full of people and everybody sees something a little bit differently. So I just wanted to share one of the funny captions that came through. An influencer. Can I get a round of applause for Amanda? Thank you. So we are at such an exciting stage in technology. There's so many tools and technology like never before available. But I think sometimes what gets in the way is what's happening in organizations. And we can have conversations that sound a bit like this. Are you ready to meet about digital transformation? We can't see your slides. Do you need to download the video plugin? We're restricted to IE7. Okay, I tried to email the slide deck, but it bounced back. Our file limit is 1 megabyte. Dropbox, WeTransfer, blocked by our firewall. Google Docs, yeah, right. I'm not sure how to present to you. Can you fax it to us? So with all this exciting technology, sometimes our mindsets and our organizations haven't quite caught up to it. And at the same time, when we think about all of this exciting technology, sometimes it's coming at us so quickly, it can outpace how we actually apply it to the business. This year will be all about AI. Yes, and podcasts. Yes, and nano-influencers. Yes, and social commerce. Yes, and blockchain. Yes, and voice search. Yes, and live video. Shouldn't we talk about our strategy first? Silence. Anyway, this will also be the year of VR. So between those two things, we have organizations that can be very slow to adopt, and we have a lot of exciting technology that sometimes feels like the shiny new thing that can create a bit of tension. There's a quote that I really like, that technology changes exponentially, organizations change logarithmically. And at the intersection of those two things is friction. And for us working in business, we have to navigate that friction. How do we apply the right technology at the right time to really make an impact? Now that we've agreed on the marketing technologies we need, let's move quickly to integrate them into our operations. This is a quote from Forrester's research last year that found that 21% of organizations believe that they are already finished with digital transformation. Checked it off the box. And so we have a ways to go. I like to describe where we are today as an awkward adolescence of digital. All of these tools are becoming available. Our mindsets haven't quite caught up. And that can lead to situations that can be kind of funny, particularly if we're selling products to customers. I come from a marketing background, so a lot of the examples I'm going to share today are in the world of marketing. But you can imagine a lot of situations where we are in this awkward adolescence of digital. This subway has no internet access, but that won't stop us from asking you to scan the QR code in this ad. Or if you've ever seen a QR code on the side of a moving bus going down the road, as if somebody is going to see it and think, I have to follow that QR code and take it out of their pocket, quickly open up a QR reader, scan the ad, and then it will probably take them to a website that's not optimized for mobile. That's what I mean about the awkward adolescence that we're living in today. Here's a poor guy sleeping and his phone starts going off, goes off a little bit more, finally wakes him up. Having trouble sleeping? $5 off nighttime sleep aid liquid caps. Order Kleenex. Ordering Amazon Basics facial tissues. No, I said Kleenex. Amazon Basics is 50% off the name brand. But I said Kleenex. Kleenex, here is the weather for Phoenix. I think my Nest smoke alarm is going off. Google AdWords just pitched me a fire extinguisher and an offer for temporary housing. So we're in this awkward adolescence. Don't worry, it's only marketers collecting our personal data so they can create more relevant advertising for us. Now that we've invested in this marketing tech stack, what's the ROI? That's a good question for a new analytics software tool we should buy. Yes, and a new layer for data visualization. So this is the awkward adolescence. This is what it looks like in practice. And at the same time this is happening, consumer expectations have never been higher for what the technology can actually do. Here's somebody in an airport. All of the flights have been canceled. Honey, just be patient. The hotel brand I'm loyal to isn't optimized for mobile. Honey, she said to say she left you for another brand. And this cartoon came out from an interesting piece of research from Google that found that people are now more loyal to their need in the moment than they are to any particular brand. And as somebody trained in marketing, I found this really interesting and kind of scary, because my marketing training taught me that working in marketing, I could develop a situation where the people would be loyal to the brand beyond reason, no matter what. But this is saying that the needs of the moment are actually more important. And that's an exciting thing to understand, because if we work in any kind of a business that has customers, if we understand those needs in the moment, that becomes a gateway into how to think about applying all of the exciting new technology we have at our disposal. But if we don't do that, we stay in this awkward adolescent stage. So here's an example of a brand that understood needs in the moment. So that situation I just showed you, somebody is in an airport, all of the flights have been canceled. This is something that this hotel chain started to think about. It's a pretty small hotel chain in the United States. They're not as large as Starwood, as Marriott. They don't have the marketing budgets that those bigger brands have. They can't beat Starwood by trying to out-Starwood. So they realized they were going to try to compete in a different way and use data and use technology and use a lot of these tools to allow them to punch harder than their weight. And they thought, we're going to focus explicitly on that use case. Somebody is in an airport, their flights have been canceled, they didn't know they would need a hotel, but now they do. This last-minute insight. They used to try to bid on keywords against Starwood, and you try to bid against them and you'd lose every time. But instead they thought, maybe we can use data to only bid on keywords when there's a high likelihood that people's flights have been canceled. So they developed an algorithm, they pulled in real-time weather data, real-time flight cancellation data, and then they developed a way to bid on keywords only in those situations and dynamically generate creative that specifically spoke to that use case. Flight canceled, Red Roof has you covered with rooms only 3 miles away. So much more effective, allowed them to compete against Starwood, and here's a little brand able to be successful because they properly understood all of this technology, but they applied it, more importantly, to an insight, to a way that they could deliver to the needs in the moment of the audience that they served. And that's an exciting place to be as a brand, because you no longer have to be the brand with the biggest marketing budgets. Here are two people seated, surrounded by paid advertising from a big budget brand, and one of them is saying, I'll have what she's having. That's an example of a need in the moment. And delivering on those needs in the moment can be really powerful. So that's what I mostly want to talk about today, how this mindset can evolve. I'm going to talk through 6 different examples of how I think organizations are struggling a little bit with this shift in this awkward adolescence. And I'm going to share cartoons and case studies of ways to think about it a little bit differently. That's my goal for today. So I'm going to go into a little bit into my background, because I have kind of an unusual background for a cartoonist. Not like every cartoonist, but as a kid, that's what I most wanted to be more than anything in the world. These were my 3 biggest heroes growing up. It's Bill Watterson from Calvin and Hobbes, Gary Larson from Far Side, Berkeley Breathed from Bloom County. These were my heroes, and I drew cartoons all the time, imagining one day I want to be a cartoonist. And then I grew up, went to school, and realized there aren't a lot of jobs for cartoonists, so instead I went into marketing. I started drawing cartoons again in a very unlikely place, Harvard Business School, while I was a student there. And then after graduating from business school and drawing 2 years of cartoons for fun and as a hobby, I went into marketing. I worked at General Mills, a big American food company. I was at Nestle. I was at a startup consumer packaged good company called Method. I was interim chief marketing officer at a technology company called Hotel Tonight. And all along, I just drew 1 cartoon a week, and I would send it out to whoever wanted to subscribe to get my marketing cartoon. And eventually, it came to a point 9 years ago where I was able to quit my job and draw cartoons full-time. I started a small studio with my wife, and we work with other cartoonists now, basically helping brands tell stories using the medium of cartoons. So that's my background, and it shaped a lot of my thinking on how I look at the world. I still draw a cartoon every week, observing how everything is changing and everything is happening. And I get an opportunity to come to places like this and talk about what I've seen using cartoons. So I want to walk through a few different examples of this mindset change. The first example is that there's no longer a captive audience. I love the show Don Draper, Mad Men. I loved seeing how advertising was thought of in this golden era of advertising. When I worked at General Mills, we had a collection of brands in that company that were some of the top advertising icons from the Mad Men era. The first brand that I worked on was called Green Giant. And I found myself, my very first day at General Mills, arriving at my desk, and I had all these material about how you think about the Green Giant brand. And I literally found in this material a creative brief that was written by a young Leo Burnett. It was literally how you thought about marketing around the era of the Mad Men era. And what amazed me was that how much at that time we were still thinking of marketing the same way. One of the fundamental assumptions in that brief was that we had a captive audience. We just needed to talk about our brand enough times in the right way, and people would respond. And in the early days of advertising, there were only a few places to get your marketing message out into the world. You had a couple discrete channels. In the United States, there were only 3 television channels. But things have shifted a bit. In the old ways, this is what they referred to as the TV industrial complex. You just sort of repeat the same marketing message over and over and over again. But nowadays, the landscape looks much more like this. Your ad ignored here. Just like we as marketers, me as a marketer, have more tools than ever to get in front of audiences like never before, it's never been easier for audiences to tune out anything that we're trying to say to them. We don't even have a captive audience when they're in your store. This pair is so perfect. I can't wait to buy them cheaper online somewhere. What's your Wi-Fi password? And nowadays, working in the world of marketing, you can't interrupt just by changing how you talk to audiences. We learn to speak your language so your generation will start to pay attention to our ads. And they respond with the middle finger. Nowadays, the marketing landscape looks much more like this. Every one of these nodes and touch points is a place that people discover brands. And Don Draper doesn't know how to work in a world like this. So the mindset ultimately has changed. And that's creating some friction. So here's a brand a lot of people love. This guy obviously loves this brand, Nutella. There was a woman in Italy named Sarah Rosso who loved this brand so much that she decided to start a holiday, World Nutella Day. Tried to get people excited about it. She asked people to send in recipes of things you could make with Nutella, send in pictures like this picture. What do you think the parent company of Nutella did when they came across this? They sued her. They sent her a cease and desist letter. Not using the brand with their permission, it's not the right font, not the right brand voice. What a missed opportunity. I support word-of-mouth marketing just as long as we tightly control exactly what they say. That's a bit of the mindset change, the friction, because organizations are very resistant to giving up control over their brands. So here's another example. How many of you have been to the American state of Kentucky? Not surprised if not very many of you have, but a couple. Every state in the United States has a tourism department. They want more people to visit their state, try to get people excited about their state. The tourism department of the state of Kentucky developed a marketing campaign, and they decided to define what the Kentucky brand stood for. They came up with the words unbridled spirit. They tried to get people excited about unbridled spirit. They did a lot of social media work. It really was falling flat. And then along come these two guys. These two guys happen to work in advertising. They happen to live in the state of Kentucky. They thought that unbridled spirit was kind of lame. If you Google unbridled spirit, you get a horse ranch in Texas. What does that have to do with Kentucky? So these two guys, on their own, decide that they are going to rebrand the state of Kentucky. They came up with a platform they liked a lot better, Kentucky Kicks Ass. And then they decided to travel around the state, interviewing people, having them talk about why Kentucky kicks ass. They developed media. In Kentucky, there are more barrels of bourbon than there are people. And all of this, they were completely unpaid and doing it just because they love the state of Kentucky. Here's what the tourism department thought about their campaign. We certainly would not sanction or endorse that phraseology. These guys are Kentucky natives and they love the state, but they have a different constituency, which is no one. The internet loves statements like that. So these guys continued to run with it. Regardless of what Kentucky's tourism department says, we're rebranding the state. A grassroots movement is taking place, driven by proud Kentuckians, the internet's plural, and a little social media. Pretty amazing, pretty powerful, but what ultimately is more inspiring? And this is a real scary thought for organizations trying to retain control of their brand. So ultimately, this mindset, I think, has to evolve. There's a lot of power in people like Sarah Rosso with Nutella, these two guys from Kentucky, and it's very difficult for organizations to get their minds around that. I'm not advocating giving up entire control of the brand, but from a marketing perspective, fundamentally, if we're going to understand the needs of the moment of our audiences, we have to fundamentally rethink marketing, rethink advertising to something that ultimately has to be worth sharing to the audience you're trying to reach. That's the first idea. Second idea I want to share is the idea that digital can't save boring marketing. Just because it's digital doesn't mean that it's going to make it something that people want to interact with. We need to stay focused on our marketing priorities and not get distracted by every shiny new, look, squirrel. It's very tempting to chase after the next squirrel before we have an idea of how we're fully going to take advantage of that. So your marketing plan to sell more soup is live streaming virtual reality 3D printing wearable drones. Maybe we shouldn't have scheduled this meeting right after South by Southwest. Tell us again how Snapchat will help our brand sell more term life insurance. I may have a big YouTube following, but are you sure I'm a good fit to promote your insurance brand? I'm only 12. Just do something millennial. So a lot of times organizations can adopt these things without fully thinking through how they're going to do it in a unique way or do it in a way that really has an impact. And I want to share an example of one of my favorite marketing campaigns, partly because I think it has the right DNA in the idea that we need to take full advantage of these tools, and yet the idea itself is actually not digital at all. But I think it has a lot to say with the power of creativity of the idea. And if you have the creativity of the idea and then the right technology tools and platforms, you can extend and amplify it and make it that much more remarkable. So this is a smoothie brand, Innocent. I first came across this brand when I had the chance to live in the UK, and I fell in love with the brand and everything that it stood for. And one day I'm walking through the store and all the bottles are wearing hats. And this blew me away. Because coming from the world of consumer packaged goods, one, this looked hard, and two, I thought if you were in a store environment, the only thing you could do is have a buy one, get one free or a shelf tag or something like that. But here, all the bottles were wearing hats, and I was really amazed by that. And I started to look more into the idea. I realized that for every bottle that you bought at full price, you get a little hat, and also 25p would go to this organization called Age UK that provided heating oil for the elderly in the winter. So this wonderful cause marketing campaign. And I was like, that's a really interesting campaign. Where did they get all the hats? Because all the hats were very different. They were all unique. They were different shapes and sizes. They referenced different cultural references that I couldn't imagine how they could have created that many hats, because it was in every store that I went to across London at that period of time were wearing little hats. And then I realized the hats were actually knitted by their own consumers. They somehow had the power of an idea that got people motivated to bring out knitting needles and knit hats. And that just blew me away, to figure out how you would get that kind of response. Because working in marketing, everything I try to do is some sort of response rate, getting people to click on this or fill this in or drive some action to the store. And here, they were actually getting people to break out knitting needles and knit hats. And hats were generated all over the place. People could relate to this story. They had members of the royal family in England knitting hats. This is inside of their office at the time, all these hats coming into the office. And that's the power of a creative idea. And if you were in the store, at the end of the day, which smoothie would you pick up? One of the things I love about this idea is that it is so low tech. It's hard to be more low tech in this. You have knitting and you have the elderly. And yet everything about this idea is powerful, that when you then add technology and find ways to be digital and optimize it and extend it, it can make it that much stronger. And they've been doing this ever since. They found that when they ran this promotion, the lift, or the promotional lift, was higher than if they had just given the money off its shelf. And that's the power of a creative idea. And over time, they've added different things to it. This was so Pinterest ready, even before there was Pinterest. And as they expanded it and amplified it, it's become this evergreen idea. So that's the second big idea I want to share with you, is thinking about how do you have something that has that much creativity in the idea that you can use the technology to enable it, and not use technology only as a crutch. Quote I love from the CEO of Diageo, that it's not about doing digital marketing, it's about marketing effectively in a digital world. And that ultimately puts more pressure on us, and it's ultimately more fun to think about how you can bring creativity alongside everything else that you do. Okay, third idea I want to share with you is that customers don't care where they are in the funnel. And the funnel, many of us in the room are familiar with the classic funnel, basically driving people to a purchase. There's awareness, do whatever drives the most traffic, like listicles about cats. Consideration, relentlessly harass them with marketing automation, trick them with a bait and switch offer, and then hope they promote your brand to all their friends. So the classic marketing funnel is something a lot of marketers think, how do you get people to the next step? And much like the English expression tunnel vision, if we're not careful, marketers can get funnel vision. We start to be so focused on where somebody is in the funnel that we completely miss the big picture. We can sometimes miss what the customer actually cares about. I'm just looking for the bathroom. We miss it altogether. And ultimately, that's something we need to bring to the table as well. Marketing funnel can be a useful tool, but customers don't really care about that. And so often in business, we can be very sheltered and siloed, and we forget what the life is like on the actual other end of that spectrum. But all of us, even if you work in marketing as a day job, we're ultimately also consumers and customers. We are the recipient of that. I had an experience recently that really brought this to life for me. I came home one day, our dishwasher had emptied all the suds and water all over the floor. It was broken, and I was upset about that. And then when I looked at the little display on the dishwasher, it was flashing the letters FU over and over again. Driving insult to injury. It wasn't until I Googled why my dishwasher was saying FU that I realized that stood for failed unit, not great user experience design. But then I went through the process of shopping for a new dishwasher, and thinking of the classic customer journey. And everything I was exposed to, I could understand from a marketing perspective why I was being exposed to it, but it ended up being the most frustrating experience going through that journey. Searching leads to clickbait. Sites not optimized for mobile. Overwhelmed by choice. Sifting through fake reviews. Unclear tech specs. Looking for a number to call. Waiting on hold. Endless retargeting ads. We may have to get used to washing these by hand. And so very often we forget that. We need to remember what it's like ultimately to be on the other side of this. We're testing new digital ad formats that are harder to ignore. Inside the world of marketing, very often these tools we use to apply them in this way, in ways that can ultimately completely irritate the audience we're trying to reach and completely miss the opportunity, miss the big picture. 8 types of annoying ads, the pop-ups, impossible to close, autoplay, problems with incontinence, oversized, pre-roll, clickbait, retargeting. Why is everyone installing ad blockers? And that's because of the way we optimize for our tools. We drive results in certain ways, but sometimes miss the big picture. Careful, the last content was full of marketing. And ultimately, one of the things that we're missing is thinking about what the customers and the consumers actually care about. If you were to scan the brain of a typical consumer, they'd have things that really mattered to us as humans. My husband, my kids, my friends, my career. I don't see this brand of pickle relish anywhere. And so often we miss what that's like, actually. But when we do, it can create a lot of opportunity. So Charmin, large toilet paper brand. How does a brand like Charmin think about this and think about the actual needs of the consumer? Not just having discount coupons and that type of thing. Charmin did something kind of interesting. They tried to think about the needs in the moment, something that they could own as a brand that would actually be of real utility and value to their consumers. And the insight they came up with is that when you're away from home, away from the office, and you're in a city, it's really hard to find a clean restroom, to know where to go. So Charmin developed an app called Sit or Squat. And basically across a bunch of different cities, they create a map. You don't want to go to a public bathroom that is red. And that's an incredible value. Imagine how you feel as a potential consumer, how you feel about the Charmin brand, that the brand has thought about the utility, something they could do as a toilet paper brand that actually creates real value and utility. And that kind of breaks, ultimately, the cycle. It expands how we think about what brands can stand for and what we can be. They've expanded upon that with a whole bunch of things, but ultimately it breaks that paradigm. We finally found a way to get people to engage with our content. And the big lesson here, I think, is that the best marketing doesn't feel like marketing. We all know what it's like, even if we work in marketing, to not have a marketing hat on. And so having that sort of philosophy, then we marry that against the tools, the technology, the data, we can make the things that we do that much stronger. Okay, the fourth idea I want to share with you is the idea about being data-driven, but not being data-blinded. There's another type of filter that can happen. It's amazing to see the shift in the data that is at our disposal in business nowadays. Data that we never had ever before. And marketers are classically, as a discipline, I think, late on the value of data in their lives. You can have a seat at the table as soon as you can back up your marketing ideas with data. So I think marketers in many ways have to earn a seat at the table because historically that's been a lower priority than other things, and that's changing things dramatically. But I think in addition to the data that's available, we have to get more sophisticated about how we use that data. This decision is too important to make just by listening to my own gut. You saw earlier today the smart gut at Bisno. We drew this cartoon kind of in the spirit of marketers listening to their guts and business people in general listening to their guts. But I think as the data becomes available, sometimes there's a miss on what it can actually be used for. Let's solve this problem by using the big data none of us has the slightest idea what to do with. And oftentimes you find a little piece of data and have it say exactly what you want to say. Our marketing program is clearly successful, as shown by this graph of how awesome I think it is. And then you can look at a couple different data sources trying to make sense of it. Sales, shaved heads. We found this correlation in the data. Everyone take a razor. And then you end up with dashboards that can often look very pretty, but be very meaningless. Vanity metric that has nothing to do with sales. Graph that doesn't match any other department's numbers. Chart that hasn't been updated lately. A really pretty map. No idea what this is or what to do with it. And oftentimes we guide our businesses that way, and that can lead us to make really bad decisions. Here's somebody pulling in their post box. They're finding a catalog with a shoe. They see an ad for a shoe. They see a digital ad for the shoe. They hear a radio ad for the shoe. They see a TV ad for the shoe. They buy the shoe on their phone. Based on the data, we should move 100% of our spending to mobile. Are the digital ads we buy actually being seen? Absolutely. Almost half the time. At least 50% of the pixels for a whole second. Hopefully by a human. Maybe on a site without porn. But there's no way to verify that. That explains the low CPM. Yeah, it's a great deal. And because we don't fully understand data and we aren't savvy enough to understand the big picture with some of the metrics that we look like, we can end up experiences that are fundamentally broken. If you've ever tried to unsubscribe from a marketing newsletter, it can be one of the most frustrating experiences, but there's a reason why it's so frustrating, because somebody out there is trying to optimize for the metric of minimizing unsubscribes, maximizing total subscriber count. Tap the link, mark unsubscribe. There it is in a 4-point white font on a white background. verify your identity, email, name, password, street where your uncle lived in 1994. Manage your preferences, pause for an hour, only send one email per day, unsubscribe to this email, but keep our other emails coming. Give feedback. Why would you like to unsubscribe? I don't like to save money. I'm an idiot. All of the above. Confirm. Are you sure you're a quitter? And then the final step, a 404 error. And this type of behavior, I think, is driven by by making bad decisions, but not really understanding the data that we're looking at and not seeing how it ultimately fits to what we're trying to do in business. This idea that not everything that counts can be counted, not everything that can be counted counts. Increasingly, everything can be counted. So this is an older quote. But the other second part of that, I think still makes the point that we have to take everything in perspective and ultimately make sure it matches the big picture that we're trying to do. Okay, the fifth idea I want to share with you is that marketing is too important to be left to the marketing department. Ultimately, it's much more expansive than that. And oftentimes, customer experience breaks down because businesses think of marketing that's handled in one siloed division. I placed an order on your website and it still hasn't shipped. Well, it could be a problem with our web team, or our technical team, or our fulfillment team, or our inventory team, or our payment team. But I can't access their system, so there's no way to tell. Aren't you all part of the same team? No, I'm only in charge of excellent customer service. And this is a big opportunity for brands, and particularly when it comes to things digital, because often digital can be pushed over to a separate division. Chief Digital Officer, VP of Hype, VP of Disruption. In the bottom right, Manager of Business Results, vacant. And so if we're not careful, it gets sidelined away, and something that's thought of only in terms of a silo. Your job is digital transformation. It's not just about disruptive technology. We need a whole new way of thinking across the entire organization. This is one of our top priorities. We're all counting on you. So good luck on this summer internship. I'm here to recruit a digital native to replace my VP of marketing. And if we're not careful, that's what can happen. But ultimately, everyone in an extended part of the organization works in marketing. This was our compromise with legal. Everybody in an organization ultimately has the ability to influence customer experience and how a brand is ultimately connected with our end customers. And so I think organizations that understand this, they can be more effective. They can have more impact by bringing it innately to everybody that works there. I realized the power of this when I had the opportunity to take an American brand and help bring it to Europe for the first time. I moved from San Francisco to London and brought this brand method. We built up a small team. And because we had limited resources, we couldn't afford to have a call center. So one of the things that we had to do out of necessity is have the phone number on every bottle ring in our actual offices. And everybody on the entire UK business would have to take turns talking to actual customers. At first, this was really frustrating because you would be in the middle of something. You'd be working on a forecast spreadsheet, and suddenly you're talking to Nigel from Edinburgh about his granite countertop surfaces. But over time, it created a real impact in the organization. And we couldn't do this forever. But during that period of time, this is Phil, who worked in our supply chain group, we all were talking to actual end customers. And it became a really important and powerful reminder about the role of the customers in our brand experience and how that's ultimately everything we do is about that interaction. And even though we moved beyond having the phone in our offices, symbolically, it became something we showed to the organization we cared about. Zappos is a brand that knows this and does this very well. I had the chance to tour their offices recently. They have an award for who can stay on a customer call the longest. Anybody want to guess what the longest customer call is? 10 hours and 43 minutes. One pair of Uggs. What's the ROI on that? But symbolically, that created a real effect. Culturally, they're an organization that optimizes for the customer experience. And I feel like that's something we can bring into more organizations. I had the opportunity to interview with Apple early in my career, and when I was talking to a vice president, he told me that as a hobby, every weekend, he'd work a 3-hour shift in his local Apple store himself, never revealing he was a vice president because it gave him direct connections with the customers. Anybody know what this picture is? If you bought the very first Apple Macintosh back in 1984 and you took the hood off of the Mac, you'd find the signatures of every single person on the extended team who worked on that Mac. Not just Steve Jobs, although his name is there, but everybody, design, supply chain, engineers across the spectrum. And that's what the power of everybody seeing that they're working together on something that reaches the actual end customer. Imagine how you would feel if you were in the supply chain and you'd signed this before you shipped a single unit. You'd make sure the product was delivered on time and in full. That's the power of bringing the customer into the room. The person who manages this warehouse is just as much a part of the marketing team as the marketers, because how complicated is that to get woolly hats on all these different bottles? And their head of brand describes Innocent as made up of thousands of nice little touches. And ultimately, every organization is like that, made up of thousands of nice little touches. That if we understand that, we can take full advantage of all the tools at our disposal. Okay, the last idea I want to share with you is the idea of staying always in beta. And beta is something that's become sort of a trendy term. And like digital transformation, it's not fully understood. 21% of organizations probably think they're already in beta. But I think that there's a message here, which is that this is a lifelong ultimate pursuit. Organizations have to continue to evolve and get better at this. And it's also counter to how organizations have always been. We're having a focus group to test which questions to ask in our next focus group. We didn't have a strategy, we kept changing our minds, and we failed repeatedly. Let's tell management we were being agile. And I want to close with an example of a brand that really embodies this. This is a small brand in San Francisco called Beta Brand. Have any of you ever heard of Beta Brand? It's relatively small, a couple of you. So they built that beta into their name itself. They decided that they were going to be on a mission to show how an organization that makes physical products could represent what it's like to live in beta, to understand data, to continually to refine and get better. So this is the founder, Chris Lidland. It's a clothing company that competes against the Gap and bigger companies. Their insight is that they were going to try to win on the most remarkable ideas. They were going to launch at least one new product every single week. So you'd wait for what the next product would be. It's one of their first products. These were called the Gluttony Pants. They were trousers with an extra button to make more room for your meal when you're feeling full. You can make more. People liked that idea, so they learned from the data this was a successful one. They decided to launch an article of clothing for each of the 7 deadly sins. These were the envy pants. They made only one pair, and they sold it on eBay on an auction model. So you could be the one person with this pair. But they tried to be creative and then learn from that. They launched pants for cycling to work that would reflect off of your back pockets. And that's something that ended up turning into a whole product category for them. They've built on a place where you can store your lock. Everything in the brand is about continuing to evolve. Some of these don't do very well in the long run. A pocket for your banana. And they ended up expanding it, so now the ideas come from everybody. And they optimize and develop what rises to the top. Jeans that can keep RFID scanners from going. All the hoodies worn in Silicon Valley, they launched an executive hoodie. This is a suit that's a one-piece with a zipper. The entire suit can be taken off and put in the washing machine. This dress looks pretty innocuous, and you realize it's the little poo emoji on your phone. And as a result, this little brand has grown. 75% of their products were sold to men, and then they launched these products, pants that work as yoga pants, and overnight, practically, now 75% of their products are sold to women. Completely pivoted as a company based on the data. And ultimately, they represent, I think, and they embody in a lot of ways the organization of the future, learning from their customers. Ultimately, they had this insight. If you send in a picture of yourself, they put it on their website and send you a dedicated URL that looks like you are the model for their company. And over time, that's how their brand was built. And the insight, I think, is really powerful, because it's not just about the article of clothing, which is really powerful. It's ultimately about the relationship they have with their customers, and that their customers are buying these not because of the products, but what the products say about themselves. This guy is skydiving into Burning Man, a pretty remarkable feat. They were able to tell the world about it because Beta Brand gave them a platform to do that, wearing Beta Brand clothes. And I think that really touches on the relationship that more brands need to have with the audiences that we serve. And hopefully this mindset change will make you more successful taking advantage of everything else that you've heard about today. Thank you so much for having me.
Hi. Thank you so much, Tom, for a very interesting and humoristic keynote.
Thank you.
And could you tell me a bit more about why and how you started drawing comic strips?
Yes, so cartoons started, something I fell in love with as a kid, but then I realized, particularly when I started drawing them in my business life, that there were a lot of things I saw happening around me that were sometimes hard to talk about. It's definitely hard to talk about with my bosses, and I found that humor gave a way to talk about things that were otherwise hard to talk about. And then I realized that other people were responding to the cartoons, and I realized that those were shared problems felt by a lot of people, and the cartoons could be a bit of a teaching aid to sort of draw attention to things. When you're laughing at something, it gives you permission to talk about it in a way that's otherwise hard to do.
How can humor help us address difficult or challenging topics?
I think that it draws attention. I mean, the things that are hardest to talk about are also the things we most need to talk about. And I feel like oftentimes organizations have fear, particularly fear around change. Digital transformation is an area where this is the case. And by laughing at it, it frees up the fear. There's a quote from an Apple executive that I like, Hiroki Asai, who said that fear kills creativity, and humor is our most powerful tool to drive fear out of the system. So I think that's the role that humor can play.
Okay. And the last question then, have you ever been in an awkward situation where you think that you've done the most humoristic comic strip and nobody has laughed?
Yes. And it can change in the environment. I had a funny situation 2 years ago where I was speaking in Istanbul, and they had a translation booth in the back. So most of the audience was listening to me through a translator, and there was a delay. And sometimes I would show a cartoon, and there would be a delay, and then people would start laughing. And other times I'd show the cartoon, there would be a delay, and I'd wait, and then nobody would laugh. And that was the most awkward of all.
Well, thank you so much, Tom, for the very interesting comic strips and the laughs.
Thank you so much.